I accidentally came across a wonderful poem on the internet dedicated to a young lady named Sima Shteyner, written by Mark Mezzyborski in 1980. I was deeply moved by its content and the fact that, judging by the number of comments, not many people had read this poem. The poem was written in Russian, and I felt an incredible desire to translate it into English to convey the poignant fate and achievements of the Jewish people to a larger audience. With some effort, I found Mark Mezzyborski's phone number and called him to express my admiration for his work and request permission to translate his poem into English. Mark was surprised and deeply touched to learn that someone was interested in his work, and he graciously allowed me to translate his poem into English. He also shared that he had immigrated to Israel, where he had lived for a long time, writing poetry and prose. As he grew older, he moved to Canada to be closer to his children and thought that no one else was interested in his poems and stories. I promised to call him when I finished my translation. I did, but unfortunately, he did not answer the phone. Most likely, he had already passed on to the next world. I occasionally come across his poem in various sources, but unfortunately, the author's name is either ignored or it is credited to an unknown author. Please read this poem written by a remarkable person who survived the Holocaust and passed on truthful stories to future generations. Share this poem with your family, neighbors, and friends. We cannot allow it to be lost in the labyrinth of the internet and forgotten.
In September of 41st in Belarus, bombarding stopped, the front moved east. Germans prevailed. Soviets lost. A new word was introduced, fascist. The order was given, the city was chilled. Fascists declared their final verdict. All Jews in the world need to be killed, and then the world will be free of conflict. The Germans were armed to prevent any panic. The Jews only guessed what all this was about. They brought their children, elders, and sick. An action was peacefully carried out. Heavy footsteps of the sorrowful column filled the empty streets with the deadliest rhythm. Windows were shut. Help didn't come. Jews' footsteps beat their final anthem. Neighbors, have mercy. Rescue my children. Silence was the answer. No one saved Jews. Please have some pity, if you are a Christian. Nobody cared. Jews were refused. A machine gun stood at the edge. There was already a pile of the dead. Beneath the bloody, 20-foot ledge.
You, schmutzigen Juden, step ahead.
The Germans were calm, their movements simple.
Take off your cloth.
They didn't feel any guilt. It's hard to undress murdered people. With dead kids and women, the ravine was filled. Naked Jews faithfully stood in line, white like chalk because of cold and fear. Sheepdogs growled, completing the design of the killing action. The Germans sneered. Just 20 steps to the ledge, to nowhere. Just 20 steps of the rest of the time. Fascists were certain the world wouldn't hear how they committed the most gruesome crime. The officer played God. He felt cool and smart. Confident, handsome redhead, searched through the line of naked for a sweetheart.
You didn't. Step vorwärts.
She made a step forward, holding her chin up, as wind played with the curls in her hair. She glanced at her father. She nodded, let up a proud smile without fear.
Ich kill you morgen with the rest of the Juden. Tonight you will sleep in meinem Bett. Danke your great God, because ich chose only a few. All others simply die instead.
Her brown eyes met his blue eyes without any fear. She glanced at the ravine from the bottom up. Her beauty was worthy of the rhyme of Shakespeare. And suddenly, her hand flew up. She grabbed a handful of his hair, pulling back his head. She sank her strong white teeth into his throat, arching and leaning her beautiful, firm, youthful breast against a swastika on his gray coat. The soldiers were shocked and still they stood. The officer struggled for a bit of breath. The soldiers were armed but afraid to shoot, while the girl choked him to death. She turned into a demon from a sweetheart. She held him firm and tight. As the soldiers tried to pull them apart, she wouldn't let him see the sunlight. Into the grave filled with dead Jews, they both rolled down. Without fright. She pulled with her the entire crew. She didn't let him loose. Her teeth locked tight. A shot sent a bullet into her forehead, but her teeth still locked on him tight. He was a confident, handsome redhead. And now, he simply died. For several days in revenge, they killed. There was no chance to survive. With dead Jewish bodies, the ravine was filled. Of thousands, just one stayed alive. He brought us a story about the crime that was committed without shame, and that we honor the girl through time. Sima Shteyner was her name.